Good morning, folks, and welcome to another Midweek Conversation. It's a beautiful morning here today, and it's good to welcome Pete Lane to our conversation today. Thank you, Pete, for joining us. Pete's been part of the Emmanuel family for quite a long time now, and is also the treasurer of the Northwest Church, so has a number of hats. Though you haven't got one on at the moment, just
no
glasses.
Hat today.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Pete.
Okay, my name's Pete, and a lot of you know my wife Annie or Anita, same person, and our two lovely kids, Tom and Pippa, both of whom are living away from home now. So just the two of us in this house. I'm originally from Liverpool.
He didn't say he supports the wrong part of Liverpool in terms of.
Well, I am blue.
My team's doing better than yours, so no
not going to
guesses
get into
for
a
which
football
one.
debate. Can't get into a football debate here. But the other thing, the Liverpool connection that people maybe don't know is I'm actually a Stirk family stalker. Because I don't know how many other people, Cameron, have been involved in two churches that you've been involved in. But Cameron was minister at my home family church in Liverpool many years ago.
Many years ago.
We'll move on. So
sometimes when Pete's mum and sister come on Christmas Day and they seem to greet me like a long lost friend, it is because I am a long lost friend.
Long and lost, yeah. No, that's right. So a long time ago, back in Liverpool, back in the day. Although I wasn't there for much of the time, was I, Cameron? I was away at university, where I came over to Leeds, my first foray into Yorkshire. and was a civil engineer, a bit like Mark Bulmer, who you've already spoken to. I did my degree in Leeds, and then decided to go even further afield and disappeared off to Malawi for 2 years with voluntary service overseas. And I was a water engineer and a roads engineer in Malawi for 2 years. So that sort of covered a lot of the time that you were in Liverpool, I think. So you managed to avoid me for most of that time. But then ended up in Yorkshire. So through various means, actually not really to do with work, but to do with my main hobby, which is music and doing shows, and ended up in Yorkshire, and I met Anita down in Sheffield, where she's from, through doing musicals and shows. And then through various work situations, I was an engineer. I set up my own business with some friends and moved to Barnsley 29 years ago. So been here 29 years, same house in Dodworth, and still loving it here.
And are you working now?
No, well, part-time. I get bored, so I like to move around. So 20 years as a civil engineer, decided the business was going well. We started a business really just to work with some friends. And 10 years later, there were over 200 of us in the business, and it was sort of taking over, really. So I threw all that in, got rid of the business, and became a teacher. And so I've had just under 20 years as a teacher, local South Yorkshire schools, Sheffield, Rotherham, Barnsley. Unfortunately, that had to stop when I was poorly 5 years ago, and I took early retirement. And now I do some part-time work, and I do some volunteer work as well.
Cool. And tell us how lockdown has been for you. Has it been up or down, or a bit of a roller coaster? What's it been like for you?
Lockdown, it's been really interesting for us, actually. We've lived in the village of Dodworth, as I say, for 29 years, and I've met more people in the last 4 months or so in the village than I'd met probably previously before. You know what it's like when you're working and you go out of your home area to do your job, especially when it's a busy job like I had. You don't get much chance to actually spend time in your home area. We've really had lots of time to spend it in the home area the last few months, and we got involved in a local project, a community project, doing shopping and prescriptions. And because I don't mind working with Excel spreadsheets, I ended up doing rotas and tracking who we'd been to see and what have you. So yeah, that scheme, 25 or so volunteers, most of whom I didn't know before, absolutely fantastic people. And we've helped about 130 families over the lockdown period, and done coming up for 600 visits over that time, either shopping or prescriptions, or some just welfare visits, just checking up on people really. And that's been really eye-opening as to what fantastic village life can be and what service we can offer in our local communities.
So a real good neighbour sort of story, really.
Yeah, but I certainly myself, like most of the volunteers, reckon we've got more out of it than sometimes than the people we help.
Yeah.
Because we've felt we've been able to contribute, and the gratitude of people has been great. But just knowing that you've helped someone on a particular day with something that they would have struggled with otherwise has been it's been extremely rewarding, and I've learned a lot about both my local community and I guess about myself as well at the same time.
So something really, really positive there that's come out of
Definitely.
something that's been really difficult. And
Definitely, and of course, you watch the news and you realise you're not the only one. There's these little pockets of activity going on all over the place, and I'm sure in various degrees it will continue. And I know the support that will go on for some of the more vulnerable people in our community will continue. Definitely. Reminds me of I think Alison had put on the Emmanuel family Facebook page. She put a cartoon on about a month ago, and it had a picture of the church is empty. But everyone was doing, either preparing online sermons or doing work in the community, and I think that probably resonated with me of a lot of the images I've seen over the time, because that's often where probably my own faith takes me into sort of maybe the more practical side of things.
Yeah. And sort of spiritually, what has sustained you in these difficult days, as it were, when we haven't been able to gather as a live, as it were, as a church family in person?
Yeah, obviously personal prayer has been there. I'm not one for making a great shake of things. I'm not necessarily always out there, although some people may disagree. But in my faith, it tends to be a fairly quiet faith. In myself, we have been so lucky where we live. We can walk out from the house into some beautiful scenery, and we've spent a lot of time walking. And what I've really liked is the quiet. Given that my life is music and it was teaching and all these sort of things, just the quiet and just spending time in God's world, I suppose, and having that sort of time to really slow down and really think about things. And I guess that has been my sort of main outlet for that. But I have tried to engage with all the services each week, and that's been fantastic, just seeing different people taking part, learning about different people in different ways through the various posts. I've probably learned more about my fellow members at Emmanuel and the wider church in Barnsley over these few months than probably I knew before, because it's been presented in a different way.
Yeah. Good. And just generally through your life in terms of faith, I know that you were connected with the church right back in the Liverpool days. Has faith always been there? Has that been a sort of from cradle to now kind of faith, or have there been moments when you went away?
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up in a Methodist church family. Mum and dad very involved in the church. My sister involved in the church as well. In a fairly active church at the time. And you sort of go along and you do Sunday school. I was involved in scouts and very practically involved in that way. But I was really, really lucky that we had some youth leaders, Lol and Dave Evans and their families, who you will know well, Cameron. And they the hours they must have put in just being there for what was quite a strong group of teenagers at the time. And yet it starts off by something you just go to without quite understanding why, and it's a friendship and a social thing. But we went to Greenbelt over a few years, and even there was a local event called Crossfire at Aintree Racecourse that we went to as well. But Greenbelt really struck home with me, and that was where I sort of made a personal faith promise, as it were, surrounded by a small group of people I knew amongst thousands that I didn't know. And that really sort of shifted the way my spiritual life went, I suppose, my Christian life. But it's not always been easy. It's come and gone. You get involved in busy life, in busy business life. I did a lot of traveling with my job, abroad and around the country, quite a lot of living away from home at times. And that puts strains and stresses on. So yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster at times. From spending some time really not going to church at all, to other times when being very involved, became a steward at Emmanuel, senior steward for a while, very involved in worship leading. And so these peaks and troughs. But I think they're what happens naturally in life to some extent. I don't believe anyone really can sustain a very, very high input. And I'm not always sure it's right to either. Because sometimes the peaks and troughs allow others with different skills, complementary skills, to get involved as well. And that's right, and that's natural. And so that's been the story of my life, and I'm sure the story of many people's lives as well. But with a faith that's always been there and never gone away totally.
So a foundation really sort of put into place by your parents, which has undergirded everything really, is what you're saying. And then as life naturally goes up and down, wax and wane is a lovely sort of term, isn't it? You know,
Yeah,
and sometimes when you're highly and heavily involved, other times you take a back seat to allow others to get involved. I think that's true for a lot of people, really.
I think it is, and sometimes you need to recharge as well, but also you need to reflect. One thing I learned from being a teacher was the process of reflection, and actually sitting back and thinking, well, actually, what did that mean, or what was that situation, or did I react in the right way in that situation? And we don't always, because we're not perfect. We're always work in progress, and so that having that time to reflect and watch how others do things. I am quite a big people watcher. Is something you learn from, and you grow, and it's a privilege really to be around so many other people who demonstrate their commitment and their talents in so many different ways. And that's the benefit of being involved in a church and not just being a Christian on your own, really, that you have that support and people pick up the slack when you're not able to be firing on all cylinders.
And clearly, I think you hinted at it, 5 years ago, it was a difficult time for you. I guess there have been other difficult times when it's been hard in life. What has kept you going in those moments?
Yeah, for those who don't know, I had a brain hemorrhage 5 years ago, and that was a tough time, although I always take the view that it was tougher for my family probably than it was for me. When you're in the middle of something, you deal with it differently. I'm a fairly stoic person in some ways, and I just get on with stuff, and that sort of underpins the way I tend to react to things. Tend not to overreact, tend not to underreact. But yeah,
that's your dad coming out.
I think it is.
That's your dad coming out.
You know him well, but it's but that means that the peaks and troughs, although they're there all the time, are not always seen by other people. But in those times, of course, the people closest to you are the ones who are there to support you. And so Annie and the kids, although maybe they didn't always understand it at the time, were there to support me through those times and provide a place of protection and security to fall back into, really, to allow you, as you say, to recharge. And that nested that within the wider church family as well. I'm been so lucky over the years to meet people through my church life. Friends from university days at Christian Union up at Leeds that I'm still in touch with, and still we still support each other in different ways. My involvement at Dodworth Church when we first moved here, and the early years of our life in Barnsley, and the kids getting christened there, and then the friends we've made at Emmanuel as well, that have been friends both in church and as part of church activities, but also away from the physical building of the church as well in our life within the community. So feel very blessed and very, very privileged by that.
And you know, in those times, I guess, was there an awareness that you are just being supported by people's prayers? Is that something that you felt?
Very much so, very much so. And I think sometimes it's not always the people you expect either. Some people are very out there in the way they support, and at times that is exactly what you need. You need that physical presence. You need that flag flying almost. But then also at times, and maybe that reflects my own personality, you realise that there's people who are just quietly getting on with it. They remember you in prayer every day. Maybe you're not aware of it for months, for years, and then something is said, or you become aware of something later on, and you realise that has been a lifetime commitment to you. And that is probably, that aspect of it is what I find most comforting, and in some ways most powerful, with God's work being done quietly in the background and being there as a continuum all the time, because we don't always know when we're going to need it, and so if it's there all the time, you're always going to be supported by that, really. And that's
I'd want to concur with that, really, and maybe thank those listeners who are watching this recording who do just get on with the praying, you know, day in, day out, and pray for members of Emmanuel, and maybe if you don't, then maybe that's something that you can be involved with, you know, that regular undergirding of what's going on, of the people, of your neighbours, I think is powerful and very effective in terms of being on the receiving end of that as a leader, you know, as somebody who's been through a difficult ill time of illness. You know, lots of us have been helped and supported by the power of prayer, and that's a great ministry.
Well, the power of that is, of course, that we don't always know what's going on in other people's lives. And so those people who are so committed to that underlying prayer, as I'd describe it, which is not always about anything specific. It's just holding individuals up in prayer and situations up in prayer without knowing that it is even needed at that moment. And of course, they're the moments when you need it most, when the flags aren't flying and the message isn't out there. It's the quiet times. I mean, one of the things I've got involved with since I retired is supporting some work on mental health at a local place that supports adults with mental health issues. And you talking to the people there, you realise that a lot of the time it's not when the big events are happening that they have difficulties. It's in the quiet times. It's in the lonely times. It's in the times when no one else is seeing what's going on, and that's when it's hardest for them. And of course, the value of prayer is it's there all the time, you know, supporting people whether they know it or not.
Yeah, I'm reading a book about bereavement at the moment, Two Women's Reflection on Bereavement, and I've just got to the bit where they offer little bits of advice around their stories that they tell, and one of the pieces of advice last night was to friends. You know, it's not just about being there straight after the bereavement. It's those friends that are there 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later, and still remember and still acknowledge the anniversary or whatever. That quiet support is similar to what you're saying in terms of prayer. Just tease out for me a little bit about, you know, then the crux of faith for Pete Lane. You know, what is it about? What would you say is faith for you?
I think my big thing, I would say, is about being there for people, and sometimes that might be. I don't draw a line between being there in a Christian way and being there in a sort of for friends who aren't Christians, whatever. I just about being there as a person and as a human being, and I guess that's underpinned by an element of service, whether it be what we're doing in the village, which is very much a structured thing, or just looking out for people, really. And that tends to be something that I admire in other people when I see it. And I guess, therefore, I strive to achieve that in my own life. And again, it's not always making a big fuss about it. It's about, the regular visiting of a friend who's in the hospice or something like that, or the regular checking in on a neighbour. And Annie is so good at doing that and keeping an eye on people and being aware of what's going on. And we're lucky at Emmanuel and in the Barnsley Church that we have a lot of fantastic people who are that seems to be their mission, and they are just great at doing that. And that's what I admire, and I guess that's what I strive to do. But I've gone through different phases as well. There's times in my Christian life when I've been a bit more out there and wanted to spend a lot of time, worship leading. Music's a big part of my life. And so I often think it's about sharing the skills you have. It's recognising them, and you are one of a number of people that's come to me and put me on the spot, Cameron, and teased a bit of input out of me on various occasions. And sometimes we need that because we're not always willing to put ourselves forward, either because we think other people are doing it and we don't want to step on toes, or we're not confident about being in the right place. And having people in our Christian lives around us who are willing to talk to us and challenge us is really useful, because we need to be shaken out of where we're at sometimes. And I think that's probably the sort of person I am, really. It's, you do a job for a while and take a step back, and then it's like, well, when do you get involved again? Yeah. So I probably respond better to being put under a challenge.
So there's something there about love in action by showing love for your neighbour, and I guess that's modelled on what Jesus did and how he lived his life, and also something about being willing to serve and to be part of something bigger, using your gifting for God. Yes,
yeah, definitely. And it's that's how I got involved as Northwest Treasurer. I would never have seen myself as a church treasurer in my life. And then someone not so far from this conversation came and said, well, have you thought about it, Pete?
Sorry.
Yes, I know. But, it's, I guess part of that is knowing that you do have a skill to do something, but it's not always knowing how to put it into place. And so someone sometimes indeed needs to come along and encourage you to do that. But also it's then reflecting on it and taking time in prayer and thinking, well, is this the right thing to do? But it's also being prepared to say no when it's not the right thing to do. Because just because someone asks you to do something, or just because you feel you ought to be doing something, doesn't always mean that it's right to be doing that thing. It's a bit like when, as kids, when we learn to play football and everyone runs around following the ball all the time, and it's that sort of almost like a herd mentality. But as we grow up, and both in our lives and in our faith, we realise that actually sometimes standing back and just looking at the situation and maybe seeing what is needed by conversation, by observation, and by prayer is what's most important, really. And plugging the gap rather than going where everyone else tends to be what's needed.
So being open to what I call the nudge of the Holy Spirit is an important element of Christian discipleship. Finally, where is God at work at the moment? Where have you seen evidence of God alive?
Well, what do you mean, in terms of lockdown, or just generally?
Just generally, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of challenges that we're facing in the world. Obviously, I mean, we can all see that, but I think out of challenge also comes opportunity. I've always taken a view on that, and therefore, when there's need, there's a place for God. Whether that be holding someone's hand, whether that's intervening, whether that's supporting, whether that's giving other people strength to then go out and challenge. And of course, challenging is a bit when we find hardest sometimes, because it can feel confrontational. And yet that's what we're called to do, because we're called to stand up for what is right in God's love. And that is tough. And I mean, I'm obviously very involved in the work we're doing in the Northwest Church at the moment. despite what you may think, Cameron, I am glad I've taken on the role. We are getting stuck in, but there are some tough conversations taking place, and it's a difficult time. What I have found amazing, though, is meeting people in all the other chapels in the Northwest Church and getting to know them and their faith in a more individual way. And that has really opened up to me what God is doing in people's lives over the past year and a half, I suppose, but then sort of accentuated through the lockdown period. And I see people who are just, as we've said before, quietly getting on with it. People in some of the smaller chapels who are making sure they're going around seeing their local communities, checking up on individuals, doing whatever they can to keep their own communities safe and secure. And so I guess that's what I've been looking at more recently, the small ways in which God is working in people's lives. I've also been amazed, because I spent a fair bit of time on the computer, at the amazing amount of inventive ways of using social media and the internet for sharing God's word and for getting a message out there and for communicating with people. And you see connections being made in all sorts of different strange ways that we would never have thought possible at the time. So at a time of difficulty, it's about meeting that challenge with God's love, I suppose. And I think it leads us to some very exciting times ahead, and exciting times if we're willing to do things differently.
Yeah. and
to take that opportunity.
So God works despite lockdown, in fact, works perhaps even more effectively because of lockdown. And that's not to say that God sends lockdown, God forbid, but anything can be used when it's offered to God, even the worst of situations.
I think sometimes more comes out of challenging situations than it does now, out of the regular day-to-day. I mean, I obviously was very involved in business, and there are some parallels in the way things develop. And one of the things I remember learning about was the difference between step change and incremental change. And I know I referred to this in a meeting recently, but sometimes a difficult situation forces us into a step change situation, whether that be in our own lives or whether that be as a community or an organisation. And through step change is when we make really effective change, or change where the time scale is totally been turned on its head. About what we need to do, but that's when we need prayer and God's strength with us and amongst us to make sure that the right decisions are being made. Because when the timescale changes and things happen quickly, there's even more need to make sure you're reflecting as well that the right thing's being done.
Yeah, thank you. And through it all, God is with us. That's what I hold on to. So thank you, Pete.
That's around there. No problem at all.
Thank you, Pete Lane, for sharing with us in this midweek conversation. I'm sure lots of us have learnt lots more about you, even though you are an Everton supporter. Shame, but anyway, good luck on that one. But thank you for being with us and for being so honest with us. It's been great to chat with you this morning. Take care.
Excellent. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.